Seth, we are 1 week away from St. Patrick's Day. How are you getting ready for this, buddy?
I'll tell you what, we are 1 week away from official St. Patrick's
Oh,
Day,
that's
and we
right.
are one day away from Chicago St. Patrick's Day. So the boats are loading up with green dye to fill the river. The mood is high. The weather is cold, but the mood is high. And I am ready for it myself. How about you?
I will say, being in California now, it doesn't compare to anything about St. Patrick's Day in Chicago. And I also, and I know you're a New Englander, and I lived in Boston, but somehow Chicago is just, it's to me, it's the craziest time of the year. Is that correct?
I would say it is. It's the one where it's in, some people are down out and say, oh, amateur hour. But I think ultimately there's kind of the historic or like the parade component, the celebration of Irish culture. And then it just brings out people who aren't normally out and gives them an excuse to be, visiting with friends and being outdoors at 10 in the morning on a Saturday. So I, for one, am fully supportive of the Chicago St. Patrick's, and it's done me very well over the years.
I tell anyone who likes to celebrate, I said, you got to go to Chicago. It doesn't matter the first weekend or the second weekend, right? Because that's the unique thing. It is not a 1 day affair.
Yeah. And we're getting a true double banger this year because we get our Saturday and then the actual is a Friday.
Oh,
So
geez.
I'm looking forward to celebrating my non-Irish heritage thoroughly.
Just pure carnage.
Yeah.
Just seeing,
That's
to me, it's the 1 day at 10 a.m. You can see people peeing and puking in the streets, and you really have no problem with it, right?
oh yeah. Oh yeah. And the puke is usually green. So
Oh,
celebratory.
jeez. Well, we're talking this week in music about our first ever kind of country spotlight. And appropriately, we're talking about Ireland.
Yeah, looking forward to it. I think this is Scott, this is your idea, and I think it's a great one, both timing wise appropriate, but also plenty of plenty of detail and plenty of great music to mine as we research this episode.
Yeah, Seth, what is it about America? We love Ireland.
Yeah, well, we have first off, we have a fascination with Ireland because there's a lot of fucking Irish people here, right? I mean,
Okay,
there's
true.
there's there's more people of Irish descent by a good margin. I think I forget the number, but it's insane. There's 5 million people in Ireland, but there's like 25 million people in the US that identify at least partly as Irish. So I think it's Irish heritage is part of American heritage, I would say. So it's
Yeah.
always front and center for us, I think, here.
And I don't know any other holiday, a foreign holiday, obviously except Taco Tuesday, of another, there's 52 of those, right? But of another country that we just get so into.
I agree. It's a full embrace. I mean, there's other, there's a, huge Italian contingency in the US. Um, Mexican obviously, but I think in terms of having one day that sort of distills down fairly or unfairly, the heritage of a country, or at least the highlighting some of the things that they're
Yeah.
famous for, nothing beats St. Patrick's Day in Ireland.
It's really a tremendous celebration of other culture. And the music side, so for example, it's Friday night in Chicago. You're going to go to an Irish pub, let's say. You're going to actually hear traditional Irish music and even varieties of that. And what is it? It's kind of this like jig. There's a fiddle. There's a banjo sometimes. There's a flute. What is
Yeah,
this like Irish music?
yeah, absolutely. So, Irish music, traditional Irish music, first off, there is quite a bit of that in Chicago. There's places like Galway Arms where they actually have, I think, live Irish music every
Yep.
night. So there's kind of the performer base. But in general, it's a lot of it. There's a lot of varieties of it, but it kind of comes what we think of comes a lot out of pubs. Sometimes they're celebratory songs, drinking, etc. But there's also a lot of deep emotional, almost like poetry translated into music. I think
Yep.
these stories, these love, they're not love songs like we think of them, but they're very lyrically heavy, even if the music itself is very light. Often a 3 or 4 piece band, like you said, fiddle, banjo, flute, things like that. And it's, have instruments will travel. They come out in
Yeah.
bars all the time, and it's meant to be celebrated with others. There's a lot of sing
Yeah.
along type songs,
Yeah.
which is what I think is really broken through in some modern music, Irish bands that we'll talk about later. A lot of it feels very like in this together. Let's sing along.
Yeah.
Let's let's celebrate life, with music.
It's like a pub song,
Yeah,
like a truly everyone in their locking arms and drinking and having a ball. And that's obviously that comes from this older culture, but I think Chicago at least has embraced it as many different Irish pubs in every single country. I think we went to one in Japan or walked by one, and it's everywhere.
I remember it. I think it was up on a second floor. I
Yeah, that's
remember it
it.
pretty vividly, actually.
That's
Yeah,
it. And they're
yeah.
playing Irish music. So it's this because I don't hear Japanese traditional music in any bars. I don't even hear traditional, I'd say Mexican. But somehow on with Ireland, just everyone can get into this very almost ancient music, but then has developed and evolved into something that, as you mentioned, there's Irish American bands that are just huge. Probably in your neck of the woods over in Boston and Rhode Island, there's probably starting the celebrations.
Absolutely. There's bands that are, there's bands that it's interesting. There's sort of bands that truly play traditional music.
Yeah.
There's bands that there's Irish bands that play modern music, whether it's rock, whether it's punk, but sort of infused with some of that historical. It's the instrumentation of it,
Yeah.
whether it is just the general sound of it or the feel of it, the beat of it. And then there's American bands that have kind of co-opted that sound and made it all their own. So it has found its way into a few different subgenres of music that all find themselves very prominent here in America.
It's really interesting. One story that I found out in this research that you'll see in many modern Irish bands, including the most famous, the Dubliners, is the banjo, right? We all talk about the fiddle, the bow, the flute, but the banjo I thought was really interesting because it's not native to Ireland. It was actually developed by African Americans in the Deep South. But I would say exported or imported. I don't know what the right direction, I guess exported to Ireland that have then adopted it. And so a lot of modern Irish American bands, as well as traditional bands like the Dubliners, will include a banjo, which is
it seems
really
it seems
interesting.
kind of random, and it kind of shows, I don't want to say the power of music, but how things spread. It's kind of hard to,
Mhm.
it probably was started with a group of immigrants who went back and brought the instrument with them. And like, it's amazing how things spread, but it absolutely has sort of woven itself as an integral piece of what we think of today as Irish music.
That's right. And when we're thinking about Irish music, what would you say, Seth, is the most popular Irish export that everyone knows?
I would say, I mean, it's the correct answer is U2, right?
Yeah, our favorite band.
And be honest, Scott, did you recommend this so you could talk about U2 for 20 minutes?
No,
Because I'm gonna have to jump in front of that train. We got to hit some other bands too.
We're not gonna. To me, that's a whole separate thing. But we just
Yeah.
have to mention it to be a proper and correct in our research. But I would say, on the whole, people would probably say U2, right?
Yeah.
Even though I don't think a lot of their imagery. Like, for example, we were talking about Leonard Skinner last week, and they had the Confederate flag, or some other bands wave a flag of wherever they're from. U2, I didn't believe was waving the Irish flag all the time.
I think they were, and I'll correct you slightly there, because I
Okay.
think early in their career they were doing that more. Late 70s, early 80s, they were, and literally there's a famous some festival and Bono is actually marching with the flag, and it's very
Okay.
powerful, and it was sort of Irish independence was part of their identity. But I would say that changed very quickly by their third or fourth album. As they started getting more famous, they
Yeah.
started probably being more a product of the world rather than a product of Ireland.
Yeah.
I think
They start flying the American flag. They're like, it's a bigger market.
like, way there's 100 times more people and a lot more money to be
Like,
made. Maybe.
and just to tell you, there's only 5 million people in the island of Ireland, right? So it's like, hey man, I think I'd rather go with the US market.
Yeah, yeah.
But it all goes back. You have obviously traditional Irish music that goes back centuries and centuries. But in terms of modern music, really in the 60s, you had these bands called the show bands that were playing essentially dance halls, playing UK and US hits. But one of the most famous bands of that was Them, based on the 1950s horror movie Them, which was led by Van Morrison.
Yes, and an important distinction to make here. I think it's right that we're talking about Van the Man. Van Morrison is Northern Irish, so he's from Belfast.
That's correct.
Culturally a little bit different, but I think it's relevant to talk about because he was so a part of that show band scene, which
Yep.
I've seen a documentary on it. It's called the Miami Show Band Massacre, which is a
Okay.
fucking wild movie. It's about it digs in, and we won't get into the politics of Ireland
Yeah.
versus Northern Ireland here on the podcast, but it's that musically that scene ruled Ireland and bled into, again, like you said, England and the US, and it was essentially cover bands, but the cover bands themselves were more famous than some actual bands coming out of those countries. I mean, they
Yeah.
were huge, this movement. It kind of kind of was contemporaneous with the Northern Soul movement. There was a lot
Yeah.
happening up there,
Yeah.
and show bands were sort of the Irish equivalent of that, I think.
And Van Morrison, coming out with these monster hits, obviously Brown Eyed Girl, which placed on Rolling Stone's top 100 greatest pop songs of all time, Grammy Hall of Fame. But what I thought was interesting was that when the band Them came to the US, the Doors opened up for them.
Really?
Them and
opened up for them.
them, and
Yeah.
sharing the same last name. Jim Morrison was so influenced by Van Morrison, which I thought was really interesting. And they said even some of his stage antics were directly influenced by Van.
I would not have picked that up on my own, but now that you're pointing it out, I see it 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, that's accurate. And Van Morrison is one of the quirkier, and that's, I think, being generous performers. And people say, if you catch him on a night he's in a good mood, it's one of the best shows you've ever seen. And if you catch him when he's in a shitty mood, you'd be like, I would never pay money to see him.
So that is kind of the godfather of Irish rock, if you will. But he had subsequent hits, like big albums such as Moondance in 1970. One of my favorite, Seth, I got to tell you, we talked about live albums in a previous episode, but It's Too Late to Stop Now, which is a 1974 double album live from Van Morrison. I tell anyone who just likes music to buy this live album. It's one of the greatest live albums you'll ever listen to. And I'm right there. Put my stamp right there, Seth. The D-Side's official recommendation.
I am more than happy to second that recommendation. That's one of my favorites as well. I was listening to it not like within the last few weeks. It holds up. It's so powerful. Yeah. The band's incredible. He always played with incredible musicians. Go listen to it. If you have any interest in Van, that's him at his best.
It definitely is. Subsequently, in the late 70s, or actually mid 70s, Gilbert O'Sullivan. Now, Seth, I'm a huge 70s light rock fan. Okay. And this is not yacht rock, right? That's different. That's a different thing. I'm talking early 70s Carpenters, whatnot. Gilbert O'Sullivan had monster hit with Alone Again Naturally, which is a beautiful song. We'll put it on our social media. I just found it one of the most beautiful tracks coming out of Ireland and just in general. And that was really the 70s started that kind of rock into light rock, but then you had heavy metal. And this, for those that have heard the song, The Boys Are Back in Town. And if you saw, I said, how would you describe this band and convince people that they're Irish?
I mean, honestly, it's a great point, and I would have never guessed that they were Irish. So the talk about a band with a famous live album, Live and Dangerous by Thin Lizzy, is one of the greatest live albums ever made. And I actually think the cover of that album, which is Phil Lynott, the lead singer, in leather pants with his bass on his knees, and it's like, this is the band in one picture. It's crazy. They were metal before metal was metal. They're powerful guitars. There's nothing about them that smells Irish at all until you hear their banter between songs. Also very unusual at the time. Multiracial band, black lead singer, white band members. That was pretty unusual for Ireland, but they were huge. They had obviously a handful of hits here in the States, but but also had like a hit with the song Whiskey in the Jar, which is a kind of a more traditional Irish song. Just an incredible band. And quiz or trivia fact, which I think I've said before.
Lay it on me.
Their touring harmonica player is Huey Lewis. who later obviously got very popular with his own band, The News, but he used to be Thin Lizzy's harmonica player on tour. So
there you go. There's the Irish-American connection for anyone who wanted
Thin Lizzy kicks so much ass. They're great.
They are truly an amazing band. Jailbreak, 1974. They're just brilliant. And when you see them live, I've never seen them live, but when you see footage of them live, I think that's why they've held the test of time. Even our good friends Metallica All right, Metallica at I think concert, which is this famous concert venue in Ireland, played Whiskey in a Jar.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
as good. Not as good.
Not as good. And I guarantee they ripped it from Thin Lizzy. But oh shoot, what did I want to say? Yeah, I'll think of it. But they are, a definitive early rock band that I think it's impossible to overstate the influence that they had on that genre.
Yeah.
They were incredible. And they have, I would say, my touch tunes, they've gotten more of my touch tunes music in a bar money than any other band.
Yeah.
I'll pump money into the jukebox after a few beers to some Thin Lizzy. So
yeah, it was
heavy endorsement.
When I saw Oasis in their 1996 tour, and that's how they opened up every show. The song came on "The Boys Are Back in Town," which I thought was really cool to pick Thin Lizzy. But as we move into the 1980s, obviously we talked about U2, and we don't need to talk about them anymore. But there were a lot of very interesting bands that came out. One that I saw, Seth, in the 80s, and I had no idea who they were. They opened up for Bob Dylan in, I think, 1988, were the Pogues.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked in our previous episode about the Northeast bands like Dropkick Murphys. But the Pogues were the originators of this punk Irish rock. How would you describe them?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's this blend of like, it is very clearly not even influenced by traditional Irish music, but kind of is traditional Irish music put in the hands of guys who, rather than, picking up a bass, they picked up an accordion, right? And in some of the songs they have, Worst Day Since Yesterday, things like, or excuse me, not that one, that's whatever. But they've got these songs, Body of an American, like these very kind of emotional dirge songs that kind of turn into rock punk songs very quickly. And Shane MacGowan, famously kind of lived the rock star lifestyle, but then a guy in his band was playing accordion. Like it was just, they really blended the worlds. And I will say, for better or worse, very much reinforced the stereotype of like Irish people, they're drinking, they're partying, they're having fun.
They're fighting. Because it was so innovative at the time. I can't remember hearing that Irish music that you would typically hear on St. Patrick's Day with a punk attitude and this energy, like a punk energy.
Yeah.
It was really innovative. I think I imagine influenced the Dropkick Murphys or Flogging Mary, some of these other
Flogging Molly,
Flogging Molly, sorry, Irish American bands to come out recently. But that I thought in the 80s was very, very interesting. And as moving into like the 90s, where the Cranberries were just, I thought, of just a beautiful band that really, I thought, exemplified another side of Ireland. Obviously, kind of a female, more, I'd say, gentler, softer.
And tone. They had songs like Linger, which is almost like, it kind of shimmers. I don't even know quite how to say it, but it sounds very 90s.
Yes.
In the most beautiful way possible. It's got this string section that rises up. It's very specific of a time and place, but also very, unlike some other bands on this, is very clearly Irish to me.
Very.
And then you've got a song like Zombie, which is not only intense, but very much political. I mean, that's about like the Troubles. That's a truly like Irish political conflict addressed in a song that I'm sure most people don't know that's the content of the lyrics, but they're able to deliver a powerful song like that and almost disguise a song that has a real message behind it too. So probably an underrated band, I would say.
Exactly. And I thought the accent comes through, that Irish, her persona, everything, whereas opposed to even Bono or Van Morrison, sometimes I didn't get that overly Irish, let's say, identity. But with a band like the Corrs, which when I was spending a lot of time in the UK, they were huge in England, which to me was very more like typical pop, very, very commercialized. I'll
tell you what, I didn't know until you just told me that the Corrs were Irish. So as we're
that's right. That's
a band like I wonder, I have a thought about this. So I think earlier on, I wonder how much of it is a conscious attempt to sound kind of like almost like the Beatles, like where it's like, I don't want to sound English, I want to sound American, or at the very least, I want it to be unclear. As for bands like the Cranberries, I wonder if that came out of sort of the I know it's not the same thing, but that sort of cool Britannia movement where it's
Yeah.
in all of a sudden it's like cool to be European, it's cool to be Irish, and there's less of a need to feel that they needed to be anything less than they were. They can just they can sing in an Irish accent, and
Yep.
that's going to resonate globally.
That's right. When you think, especially of like Britpop, bands like The Cure, overtly English accent, were
Yeah.
Pulp, were so British, even ever the songs they talked about. A little bit of the Clash, but I thought with the Cranberries, it felt like an Irish band. Like this is everything about even the footage, the videos, and whatnot, just painted this picture of Ireland. But going on to, I think it's really interesting this band, My Bloody Valentine. I don't know how
Yeah,
familiar you are with them,
I
but
am
this
originators of the shoegaze movement, pretty
now
much,
explain
right?
to all those maybe older what is shoegaze? What this Irish band that created this genre?
It's
What
like,
is it?
yeah, it's like it kind of like hard rock music, but like very light, like heavy sound, but very
Yeah,
light singing. And it's like literally they would stand on stage and look down. They wouldn't look at the audience, they wouldn't engage. It's not strange, and it's hugely influential, and it kind of
yeah,
bled into even some of like the emo stuff you'd see later.
yeah,
But they were doing it first, which is these very crunchy, intense guitars, and then almost like this high, like floating vocals that are like a little bit trancy. Like they'll kind of
yeah.
it's a fascinating genre action. Like I said, they were insane. It's one of those like you may not know a ton about them, but every band you like loves them. They're kind of one of those bands, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
The artists in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, in terms of recent bands, are there any recent ones that you wanted to call out from Ireland?
So there's a few that we talked about here. Some have had incredible success. So Snow Patrol would be one of them. They were, had
Huge.
couple huge songs. The Script were hugely popular for a while, like when I was in
Yeah.
college. More recently, you've got artists like Two Door Cinema Club. That's awesome, and they really put the cherry on top because their lead singer's a redhead, so they really nailed the Irish. They went full Irish.
They went.
Hozier, which is like 2010s, Take Me to Church, but he's a full on like soul god. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
people. It's not. He was sort of a one hit wonder in America, but I think people who love gospel and soul music are like, that dude is the truth. He's incredible. Also, shout out, I see on this list Coronas. They were a couple guys from the Coronas were friends with my Irish friends in college. And one observation that I thought was interesting about Ireland is people don't care if you're famous in Ireland. Like if you're Irish and you're in a club, it's like here people lose their minds. Oh my God, it's I don't know, pick a musician. But there it's just like they're normal dudes. Maybe someone would be like, hey, I love your music. But they were like, people don't get, like, it's just a different expectation of fame in places like, especially if it's different if you're an American really famous person, but if you're an Irish musician in Ireland, they're like, dude, you can wait in line with everybody else, which I think is kind of cool. Like you can be famous and anonymous at the same time.
So when Bono gets to the line at McDonald's, he doesn't get to the front of the line.
Perhaps he's an exception to the rule, but I don't know how much McDonald's Bono's eating. What does Bono eat? I don't even know.
Oh my gosh. They're probably like branded chicken McNuggets with some type of benevolence behind it.
He might be post meal at this point. Like he doesn't even eat, he just like nourishes with pills or something. I don't even know.
Well, when we talk about Ireland and the music and its influence on the US, obviously we have this example with Jim Morrison, but I had the chance to live in Boston for a year. And I thought that Irish American rock scene that we talked about, like Dropkick Murphys, or you said Flogging Molly, I think out in Los Angeles, was really interesting. It was this resurgence of Irish culture, but in America. That was very definable. And I think, you being from that area, I don't know if you had, was it something that you just kind of grew up with?
It was, I think in Boston, especially other places as well, but there is an intense pride for Ireland and being Irish. I mean, you see everybody with shamrock tattoos, and it's kind of a way of life. It's almost like Boston people care more about being Irish than Irish people do. Yeah. And so I think the music is an upshot of that, where it's sort of a manifestation of like being psyched about being Irish and kind of being able to present this music that is not totally traditional, but very clearly influenced, but then kind of like turning it up to 11 and making it,
Yeah.
giving it the intensity of Boston, which, as you know, is a very like hardcore, there's
Yeah.
people just talk about the Boston hardcore scene. But there are bands that have taken the hardcore Boston, taken traditional Irish music, thrown it in a blender, and Dropkick Murphys is like the most famous example of that. But there's many in that punk ska scene. To me, it embodies the attitude of like an Irish American person in Boston,
Yeah.
and it distills it down to like a sound. And I think they've done an incredible job with that.
It is true. Now, how would you describe, Seth, if you look at the UK, which interpret music incredibly interesting, right? For a lot of the bands I worshipped and loved are from the UK. And the way they did the blues, for example, like Led Zeppelin, or even the Rolling Stones, or even some of the Beatles tracks. What is unique about Ireland music, Irish music? And I'm talking about kind of more rock, but how would like a Van Morrison blues song or even U2, how do you think their history and culture gave a spin on, let's say, rock and roll?
It's a good question. I guess my kind of bad answer would be there's so much of an existing musical landscape and style and very distinctive sound. And I
Mhm.
think it's more prominent. Of course, like regular pop music is popular, but they've not that traditional music has not gone away. It's still
Mhm.
very in the DNA of the people who live there. And so I think that or naturally is going to bleed into the music. They're not Irish people trying to sound American. They're
Yeah.
Irish people making music that is influenced by everywhere with that Irishness and that sound and those instruments being baked into it. And so I think by having such a vibrant musical culture already, that is what shapes the music that you hear, even in traditional rock.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it?
I think the first time I started really interacting with Irish music was maybe after St. Patrick's Day, when I got exposed to some of these more traditional bands that would come. And what do you call them? The dirges, kind of these almost like blues.
Yep.
And the more I started learning about Ireland and its history, and being oppressed for many years, for many years, about from the English and the British, there was this sense that it was almost like an Irish version of the Deep South blues. Some of the
Yeah.
songs and about this oppression and fighting, this kind of this underdog. And so I thought it was very American in a way of this underdog culture, and a fighting spirit. But there's a little touch of sadness to it that I didn't see in some of the English music. And I thought that brought a unique spin on American music. Something like this Irish spirit about them.
This pains me to say it, Scott, but that was a very astute observation by you. I think you actually hit the nail on the head with that one. No, I think that's kind of what I was trying to articulate earlier, and you did a great job there. I think you're 100% right in what you said about kind of the inherent sort of melancholy emotion where it's celebratory. You even think of like an Irish wake. It's like, well,
Yeah.
we're mourning, but we're also celebrating, and those two things are kind of inseparable from each other. In the music, you definitely hear that.
That's definitely, when I wrote some notes here about why do I find it interesting. I even asked my mom, as you know,
Noted
still living at
Irish
home.
music historian, my mom.
Listen, and part of my research and part of the benefit of living at home, my mom making me breakfast and asking her about, hey mom, we're going to talk about Ireland today. I grew up Catholic, and we grew up kind of on the white part of town, and so it was Irish Catholic, and so we had grown up with priests, and their language. And I asked mom, well, why do people like Irish people so much? She said, oh, the sing-song language.
Hmm.
And I think growing up, is even celebrating St. Patrick's Day, but a lot of the literature, James Joyce, who I've read, a lot of his works, and even influenced the band, the Dubliners. That was James Joyce's famous collection of short stories. And I thought that dichotomy, there's always a bit of celebration and sadness, and I thought that the way they perceive themselves, coming into this fighter mentality, like they're tough, that it's like a tough breed, and so I always appreciated that. And
Yeah,
obviously so timely with St. Patrick's Day coming up.
absolutely. I hit it a little bit at the top of the show, and I think I'm glad you brought it back, because I think a lot of Irish music is an evolution of the poets and writers of Ireland, which are so prominent culturally,
Yeah.
and music is sort of a natural extension of that history, right? And so, you know, whether it be James Joyce or others, I think that once again is dead on. I think you covered it there.
Well, everyone, listen. I mean, Seth, how are you going to be celebrating? It's Friday. Is it like today? Is it or it's tomorrow's the big day to
It's
start?
tomorrow's the big day. Tomorrow's the big day. I will be.
So
I
tonight
will.
it's more. Is it margaritas night? What's going on
It might be
tonight?
margaritas. I'm headed to a concert shortly. You know, podcast research. Not Irish music, unfortunately, but I will celebrate tomorrow. And like I said, I'll get a double banger in and celebrate Friday. And I hope you're able to do the same, Scott. I know you're. Maybe one beer. Do it. Do it for Ireland. Would you?
I'm going to do that.
Do it for me.
I
Do
will
it for Ireland.
say officially to you, Seth, and to our audience, I'm going to have a full on Guinness at our local Irish pub here and celebrate our podcast episode on this fabulous country. And
Love it.
everyone, well, listen, we'll let you get the St. Patrick's Day celebration started a week early. And everyone have a great weekend. Go have a Guinness. What else,
May the
Seth?
wind be always at your back, and may the road rise up to meet you.
That's right.
All
Beautiful.
right, man.
All right, everyone. Listen, great weekend. We'll see you next week.
All right. Bye.
Yeah.